is that the so-called classical financial organizations are closely following this movement and are a little wary of it. Listen to Omar Sis, he is the boss of InTouch and Marenbai, Regional Director of Société Générale for Central and East Africa.
In my opinion, this is the meaning of the story. You don't stop a mother with her arms. We see a lot of discussions around the subject, but here we go. It's gone. I don't see what would stop it. On the other hand, I think it requires a strong regulation around the subject. We cannot allow everything to be open and people to think anything because the risks are still very important and today it is not controlled at all. The whole point is to say how to talk about cryptocurrency and regulation, words that may seem contradictory but I think they could end up in our ecosystems.
The fact that cryptocurrency allows the development of the technological tool, I think it is beyond measure. We are all aware of it and even we banks look at each other. But the subject is regulation, it is regulation. It must be strong, it must be there because well, we must not also put depositors at risk and then also we must have an education. So I think that really there is reason for all the stakeholders to sit around the table and look at risk-reward and then also the needs of our various actors.
Omar, Sis and Marenbai, who were the guests of the Codiers from elsewhere a few weeks ago. Regulation, 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 they only have this word in their mouth. Mamadou Touré.
They are not wrong, so we must understand that this is not the Wild West, okay? We are in an environment where we are talking about the savings of several years of people that can be lost. We are talking about an environment where we are going to invite the banking sector and the financial sector to participate and large investors and pension funds to participate. Without regulation, it makes it complicated. Now we must also understand another thing, that is to say that technology always goes much faster than regulation. The other thing is that it must be a regulation that must actually be, I wouldn't say permissive, but I would say that actually encourages, incentivizes. Alright? Because today we have seen that excessive regulation kills innovation in many cases or kills the entrepreneurial spirit. So I think Africa has an opportunity. Us, for example.
The banks.
And the banks, the African banks. We today with Ubuntu Tribe, we went to one of the best regulators in the world and we had a licensing agreement in principle. It took us a year but they have everything. Where is your regulator? This is Bermuda Monetary Authority. So Bermuda. And here there is nothing to do with the tax haven? No, you should know that the holdings of the largest banks and insurance companies are actually registered in Bermuda. So there you have it, Bermuda is the equivalent of Luxembourg for the North Atlantic Hemisphere. Alright? So and precisely that's why they had such a lead over the rest of the world on digital assets and on the regulation of these digital assets. And the big cryptocurrencies or the big players today are looking for it because it is the most difficult to get with the Swiss. Now on the issue of regulation, I think that this is where Africans must follow suit. If you want, when we know what an opportunity this represents for the continent, what has frustrated me a lot is to see that most Africans are followers when they can be leaders in this industry by following suit. We have good lawyers, we have good regulators, and they wait a little too often for instructions that come either from Washington or Brussels or elsewhere. Whereas today, why has mobile money been so successful? It should be known that the banks strongly opposed each other and precisely shouted regulation, regulation. But that's because it was okay at first and we adjusted it while it was progressing.
No one had a choice anymore.
There you go.
We will penetrate into the heart of the Ubuntu project. Julien Clémençot from Jeune Afrique.
Your company offers digital certificates that allow you to buy small amounts of gold, with one argument in particular: in 20 years, the price of gold has soared by 500%. So you offer individuals to stock market, or does it go further? No, it goes much further. If you want today, the issue is very simple, okay? How to protect the savings of individuals. If I am a Nigerian, if I have earned my savings in an IRA or a permanent contract, the CFA is a little more stable, okay? But hey, there was a 50% devaluation in '94 and you never know if in 6 months or in 2 months there will be a 50% devaluation, okay? That means that your savings today can completely lose their value while you are sitting on 50% of the world's gold reserves, and that gold has taken 500% in 20 years. You'd have to be completely stupid not to have gold in your phone. So it's a savings tool, first thing. Second thing, gold is this resource that has always had value regardless of geography, regardless of civilization in the entire history of humanity. It means today that it is also a passport for any African to exchange or trade with other regions because it is something that everyone needs.
At the famous safe haven.
That's it, it's a safe haven. You should also know that the international monetary system until 1971, when Nixon announced the decorrelation of the dollar on gold, was based on gold. Bretton Woods, it's based on gold, and I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we go back. If you even look at China today, which has launched its digital central bank center currency, it is backed by 20% on gold. It would still be necessary for Africans not to be stupid, if everyone. Plus we're sitting on it, so I think that.
What's the problem today? Is it locked by the political leaders? By foreign companies that lock down?
Banks that are afraid of disappearing in the face of innovations? I think that, already it is necessary to understand clearly. I will take the simplest question, the banks. Today you should know that Basel III has qualified gold as a cash equivalent in bank reserves. You should know that there has not been as much aggregation on prudential rules. Banks, it means, but this is an extraordinary qualitative leap. That is to say that today there has been an acceptance that gold today is a value in your accounts as a cash bank. So you should also know that for the last 10 years the central banks have not accumulated as much gold, that is to say that they have accumulated an incredible amount of gold, and today you see the bipolarity towards which the world is moving, okay? With the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and soon Saudi Arabia and South Africa. When Putin says well listen, me my oil you will pay for it either in Bitcoin or in gold. When you see Russia and Iran announce stable coin backed by gold, when you see the erasure that the Chinese are doing on Africa to get gold, when you also see the Middle East today. It would be a shame if we didn't take our precautions. So there we were talking about individuals or companies, but you touched on it earlier, there are states too. And states too could take advantage of the blockchain, digital certificates. Yes, absolutely. So it must be understood that for a state, so the blockchain, what it can bring to the state already is digital identity. That's pretty huge. The second thing is that a system that is oriented on the blockchain where transactions are made for the blockchain allow greater traceability, but also for the collector, potential additional resources. That is to say that I don't know me, to Douala or a Samba account or to Yamoussoukro to recover the VAT today. Good luck. So it is also a possibility to be able to create ways to create more tax resources with more transparency.
And more traceability.
And traceability.
Are you able to find out exactly where the gold comes from?
Yes, that is to say that we today as an Ubuntu tribe, this is what differentiates us from all the others. That is to say that we are not a cryptocurrency as such. It is a digital asset backed by a resource. That is to say that today you buy from 5 cents the gift, which is our digital currency, from your phone, okay? And from there, the gold may or may not increase in value, but you can also send this gold to anyone or pay or exchange for a value this gold there. So that has a value, but what we did behind it is the whole value chain. Today we use the blockchain to trace the gold from the mine to the vault. And that's very important. So we know where he is, we can geolocate him, etc., and we also have technologies because we are. I still spent a lot of time on the continent visiting these mines. There is a problem with cyanide and mercury in the extraction, so we also have a technology that allows us to extract without mercury, without cyanide, and increase the yield. So there is a great traceability, and it is also a demand that the international gold markets are putting in. We want responsible gold, we want gold, etc., and that's very important for the states too. So at the environmental level, at the traceability level, where does this gold come from? We even have a spray, a nano spray that allows with a digital entity, even when we have refined the gold, to know that this gold comes from such a mine, such a place in such a region.
Mamadou Touré is the guest of ECO-DICI and K. Dialers is the great guest of the RFI Jeune Afrique economy. You have set up your group in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, it must be nothing by chance. We'll talk about it with our correspondent. Hello Nicholas Caradran.
Hello Bruno. Hello everyone.
Dubai has become a kind of springboard for companies from all over the world to Africa.
Yes, as you say, many large international groups set up their regional office here in Dubai to conduct their business on the African continent. So, this attractiveness of the emirate, it is explained in different ways. Dubai is first of all a commercial hub with a fairly central geographical position, especially if the objective is to get closer to African countries. Dubai is also a place where the business climate is good, not to mention its political stability, but also economic. And then there are also, let's say, more practical advantages, especially in terms of transport infrastructure. Here, I am thinking in particular of the port of Jebel Ali, which is the 9th busiest port in the world. There is also the Dubai International Airport, which is one of the first in the world in the number of international passengers. And then we must also talk about the Emirates airline, which connects Dubai to many capitals, including 22 in Africa.
Nicholas Caradran, is this attraction for Dubai also true for African companies?
Yes, there are almost 30,000 African companies registered in the Emirate with the Dubai Chamber of Commerce. Many are import-export companies, for example, but we are also seeing more and more African entrepreneurs in finance or in technologies who are coming to settle here for the reasons that we have just mentioned. And it should also be noted that in parallel, Dubai is also investing a lot on the African continent. Let's take for example the case of the Dubai company DP World. This company is the one that manages the port of Jebel Ali. Well, this company, over the past decade, it has invested almost $2 billion in Africa, and it plans to almost double this amount in the coming years.
Thank you, Nicholas. Mamadou Touré, many multinationals who work in Africa have therefore set up offices in Dubai. There are a lot of African investments, a lot of financial flows. Doesn't that still raise a question of sovereignty?
Your sovereignty in relation to the African states, you mean?
Or, to investors simply to invest their money in a country that has its own interests too?
Yes, absolutely, but it is also a country that has structured its entire economy to attract these investors there, and that has set conditions that make not only the movement of people, the movement of goods and the movement of capital much simpler. Today, it must be understood that there are many free zones in Dubai, that is to say that we, for example, have therefore registered in an international free zone which is not subject to local Emirati law. And it attracts a lot of people. Another reason is to say that gold trading in large quantities goes through Dubai, so for us as an Ubuntu tribe, it made sense. And last point, it's much easier for me to travel to Africa from Dubai than to travel to Africa from Africa. It hurts me, I'm not going to lie to you, but it's a reality. When we see the problem of airlines today, from Dubai, as he said himself, I am flying direct to 22 capitals. If I am in Abidjan, if I am in Douala or Dakar, well, I need 2 or 3 stops with the omnibuses, and then maybe within 3 days I will arrive at my house, or I will arrive to see my client or my partner. So there is also an infrastructure work that the continent must do. There have been attempts, but what we must also understand is that where Dubai has given itself the means to welcome African investors and entrepreneurs, Europe has begun to close its doors. Between the visas, the controls, it makes things complicated. I may not have this problem there because indeed I grew up here, etc., but this is not the case for all of them.
Others.
There you go. And that's always what we call international competitiveness.
Message to the Europeans from Mamadou Kwidjim Touré, Julien Clémençot from Jeune Afrique.
As we have said, there are many African investors too who are putting money in Dubai. Does the fact that these rich Africans invest a significant part of their wealth elsewhere than on the continent, in the Gulf, in tax havens, in Western capitals, not fuel the fantasy of a continent dangerous for investors or reserved for adventurers? It's hard to say no to this question. But what I can tell you is, yes, I'm not done yet, so it's hard to say no because there is real indeed, alright? So if the Africans themselves do not invest at home, it is not the others who will come. But what I will answer you is that before this money he put it in Paris, London or Geneva or Zurich. Now maybe they're putting it in Dubai. They may have changed their destination, but that's also why I'm doing all this. It is to remind Africans that in fact we have resources, we can use them, we can create wealth and wealth. There is a responsibility of the African elites to say and to let it be known that they too, they bet on the development of the continent, they put their money on it, they believe in it. So there are 2 types of African elite in this context. There is an entrepreneurial elite and then there is another elite. And the other elite? The other elite may be less aware than the entrepreneurial elite. So the policies? I didn't say anything.
Mamadou Kwidjim Touré, were you at Davos?
Yes, absolutely.
There are many African initiatives that have been seen, the Africa House in particular.
I just want to come back to this question.
Quickly.
Please. Then I will come back to the Africa House. But there is also the issue of capital flight. We must not forget that the money that comes to Africa from multinationals comes out 3 times more with capital flight, tax evasion, etc. that Africa must remain poor. So it's a responsibility. Did not urge. It doesn't exonerate Africans. Africans to take their responsibility. I do not disagree, but it is necessary to know that there is a whole new generation who I think is mine today and the one who is coming, who believes in this continent, who does it despite everything with difficulties that are sometimes complicated to undertake. Then they're going to put this on the backs of the leaders, okay? But the leaders after they will put it on the backs of the former colonizers. If you want, it's everyone throwing the ball back at each other. So I don't want to get into this game anymore. We just have to do it.
Move forward.
We have to move forward.
And not necessarily on African soil.
With the proof, I don't have 60% of the amount on Africa. Now Ubuntu is not just a box, you have to understand it well. We do not have the ambition to become the leader in Cameroon. No, it is the future, it is a unicorn to come on a global scale. I'm not doing this just for, that's it. And why? Because it's high-tech, okay? We can compete, and we compete today with the best in Silicon Valley. We see them all the time. They are even wanting to invest in us. So yes, that is to say he is the child of the country, but who has a global ambition because there is a global monetary problem.
Also advancing Africa at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
Absolutely. This is what we did a few weeks ago. So we launched the Africa House. So I am a young global leader, a young world leader selected by the World Economic Forum, and we have precisely Kojo Hannon, who is my co-founder, Nima Elmi, and Andre signed it. So we thought we have been coming to Davos for years, but in fact the place of Africa is not what it should be. First thing. Second thing, the topics discussed when it comes to Africa often do not necessarily serve the interest of Africa. Third thing, where do Africans meet and where do those who want to engage, exchange, work with African leaders see each other? So we thought we're going to make an Africa House. You should know that there has been an India House, there has been an Indonesia House, there has never been for 50 years. So for me it was just necessary, and that's why I'm telling you about this new generation of entrepreneurs who are here, who have uninhibited themselves, who believe in this continent and who are giving themselves the means.
So one of your compatriots was also at Davos, the economist Vera, her son-in-law.
Vera, yes. Not only is she a compatriot, but she is also a friend. Vera was involved precisely in Africa too. You should know that Africa too. Many are also either advised at the government level or elsewhere, so we kept our commitment promise for Africa 10 years later.
Vera Sanj, former executive secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, listened to what she was saying during a debate in Davos.
We must do everything we can to trade better with each other, but also to attract foreign direct investment, because we need resources from outside. The lithium needed for an automobile manufacturing plant in Morocco needs manganese from Central Africa. We need to look into this. This is the power of the continent. We are all Africans, and if we work together, we will achieve amazing results. Trade has helped lift entire generations all over the world out of poverty. It will be the same for us. It's not just about creating a supply chain, but also about creating value, and I think Africa has the potential to do that in a sustainable way.
You agree with Vera saying, Mamadou Touré, the potential is there, we still need to work together.
In fact, I completely agree with her. It must be understood that this speech is a speech that we prepared together with Vera and this whole generation of young leaders 12 years ago today as part of the creation of Africa too. We have put together a manifesto of 120 pages with all the recommendations and a vision proposal for Africa. Vera was involved, Acha Leke, my compatriot, was involved. We took it. The president of McKinsey. We have all come together, this generation of young leaders therefore in Africa and in the diaspora, to propose a vision for Africa, and all the points she talks about we have actually been working on it for a decade, and I am glad that she is bringing it out into the open. And we must know that this very vision that we have prepared and worked on, after formulating it, we just went to the World Economic Forum where she talks about this topic to present it to world leaders, and we continued behind to the African Union as a think tank to present it to the leaders of the continent. 3 years later, 47 heads of state ratified a vision for Africa, the components of which were largely inspired by the Agenda 2062, the Paris Agenda. Is it that today, the agenda that sets major development goals for the continent, is it that today Africans can be proud of the African Union? Is the institution fulfilling its role? Is she where we expect her to be? I would say that she fulfills her role as best she can with the means at her disposal. Now, can she do better? Certainly. I think that. And it's always like me, I come from a big megastructure, there is always a concern for agility, that is to say that if we want to, we talk about regulation just now, if we want to put too many rules, we end up falling into immobility, etc.
On one of the major projects, Lasley CAF for example, this free trade zone, does it make you dream as a financier?
Yes, of course. Yes, and isn't it going fast enough? But it must be understood that no one has done it today in the world. We are talking about the largest economic exchange zone on the continent, and that is still something very strong, and therefore the president has come to Africaos to talk about it. We are talking about a free trade zone of 1.4 billion inhabitants, 50 in a few countries or 48, 49, I don't know anymore, and also in this area there are all these resources and there is the human capital that will feed the planet over the next 20, 25, 30 years. We made it. There you go. And so it is indeed, it is one of the successes, and I know that Vera has also worked very closely on it, and in this context there have been successes. It is also necessary to know that the monetary zones are also successes pushed also by the African Union. The free trade zones between Coma, the OA, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, exactly, there it is. And for East Africa too. These are things where even the continent has followed suit long before the other regions. So there have been successes. I don't think we should. Now I think that if Africa, and the management of political crises, are we talking about economic projects here? The management of political crises, in fact, is already good. You should know that there are much fewer of them than 30 years ago. So we have made considerable progress on this issue. I think that political crises are not just African phenomena, there are them all over the world, and I think that political crises in Africa are not just the work of Africans themselves. We're not hiding behind the little finger, okay? If we look at Mali, if we look at other areas, there are not only Africans in history. So if we look, well, let's say that, and I think it's interesting to watch, we have entered a moment in history when Africa has never aroused so much interest for the rest of the world with all the problems that this implies. But we are also entering a moment in history over the last 20 years when we have much fewer political crises than before, when we were less interesting before. So somewhere, there is a real maturation of this continent, and I think that it also comes with this generation. And when we talk, I see the General of the Army Corps Bruno Clement Bolet, who says, well, Africa to Africans. Africa is ripe now, and it is necessary for Africans to develop on their own without the state interventions of France or Russia, etc. So we are still talking about topics that show a maturation and a preparation today of the continent. Now there are other places where the leadership has not necessarily evolved, but the people have evolved. We're talking about leadership. I wanted to come back to the I.F.T. The AFCFTA is the project that was carried by Paul Kagame when he was president of the African Union. He is a president who fascinates a large number of Africans. Do you also fascinate him? We must still give him the success of what he has done with Rwanda. I think that in 30 years, he has transformed this country into an example, not just for Africa, for the rest of the planet. Coming out of a trauma as it was for, the genocide. That's it, to get out of the genocide, to make it a nation that shines, which is organized, which is structured, and which develops with the means at their disposal, but which ends up anyway drawing interest by the positioning they have. So there's this logic actually, and that's where it's interesting to see this comparison a little bit with Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. So a little bit. We're talking about Lee Kuan Yew, we're going to say a certain sustainability but with a vision. 2, 3, 4 terms.
It's okay.
So that's what actually amuses me. How many mandates did Angela Merkel serve? We did 4. Alright, how many mandates has he done? Probably 4 or 3 too. This is not a question of the length of terms of office. It's not a question, actually.
In France it has been reformed.
In France it has been reformed. With the Fifth Republic, which was 7 years old, we went to 5. We'll see about the rest. 2 terms. 2 terms, alright. Now, I think I was talking about the duration, but I don't know. Is democracy an African reality? I don't know. On the other hand, freedom is a fundamental reality of every individual, and we must not confuse things. So we tend to say, yes, well, it's true that I am Cameroonian, so I'm not even going to express myself on the issue of Cameroon, but there are cases where it works better than others. Now it's the question, do we have a leader who is visionary? Is there a transformation of the country? Is that it? After all, There is the question: as long as the fundamental freedoms of each citizen are respected and the country is moving forward, the question of mandates does not arise.
A question precisely about Cameroon.
Yes, and about freedom, freedom of expression. You have repeated it, you have said it, you are Cameroonians, and in your country and far beyond. Besides, the assassination of the journalist Martinez Zogo caused a real shock wave. Today, Paul Biya is also moved by it, and the authorities have made arrests, including that of the influential businessman Jean-Pierre Amogu Balinga. The pressure is also on the Minister of Justice Laurent Esso. Does this mean that impunity no longer exists? Selective? What inspires you about this Zogo case? It is a burr that reveals the flaws of the system. With a burr? That's the language we're going to use to be politically correct. Now, do you have the impression that there is so much noise in Cameroon? Do you have the impression that it can be a factor of change, this case there? I don't know. You know Cameroon, as little as I know. It is a country that has gone through a lot of trials between dead cities, between elections. So, the Anglophone crisis, etc. It is a country that is fascinating for its complexity, for its potential. The only thing I have to say is, as they used to say about China, when China wakes up, I think Cameroon will wake up. We will witness something quite extraordinary. I think that today. It's a sleeping lion. We'll say, or on an infusion. I'll stop there.
Do you have role models, people, personalities who inspire you particularly beyond the political world or the economic worlds?
No, of course not. Finally, you know me, my African awakening started with the reading of each Antitypus. So civilization, barbarism, nation, agriculture, where I realized that in fact everything that I was told in high school, college, etc. with our ancestors the Gauls or I don't know what, it was not the case of Africa, that Africa had brought a lot of things to universal civilization. For example, the word mathematics, it comes from math, which is from ancient Egypt, which means balance, and it is the dead who brought it with Spain. Alchemy, to alchemy it comes from Kemet, ancient Egypt, etc. So that was my first awakening. To understand in fact that we have a great influence on the universal civilization that has been erased from our memories as Africans, and that we must reclaim ourselves first of all. Because until we are aware of who we are, we don't know where we are going. So that was my first big role model, we'll say. After all, I followed closely during my adolescence the United States with the Martin Luther King, etc.
Nelson Mandela.
Gandhi was also a great inspiration, very great, and indeed, later I had the chance to meet people like Nelson Mandela who enlightened me enormously, but also politicians like President Obasanjo who taught me pragmatism and also to make me understand the difficulties that are consubstantial to running an African country, because I always had a bit of this very critical approach, but the realities are different on the other side. Then in sports there were some.
So precisely Mamadou Kwidjim Touré, in one of your messages on social networks, you quoted the former basketball player and businessman, by the way, also, Michael Jordan.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I lost almost 300 games. 26 times I was trusted to take the winning shot, and I missed. I have failed again and again in my life. And that's why I succeeded.
You have to miss to succeed, Mamadou. To succeed you have to miss.
To succeed, you have to miss, and then, well, this is the path that I myself have gone through, and it is this word of knowing the best basketball player in history able to say that I missed. I don't know that I lost 300 games, I missed 26,000 shots, etc. It's super important. It means that even the best in the world has failed so many times. So we don't have to restrict ourselves for fear of failure. Why? Because we come from a school environment that rejects failure and which has precisely created an elite generation that works in a logic of, we are going to say, conservatism or fear of failure or fear of risk, which means that we end up staying still. Whereas today, it's to remind people, you have to try, you have to get to the end of your ideas and learn. Because in fact, what is failure? This is a learning opportunity to become better.
Since we're talking about basketball, you practice it, by the way.
Yes, I play basketball, football.
The best player in the world after LeBron James, maybe.
I think Michael is better.
Who breaks a record for points? Will the better future be Cameroonian? Joe Mbid?
Why not? Why not?
Become French?
Became French. We made the opposite choice for him. I chose Cameroon, he took French citizenship, I preferred it. But then he also saw his own choices of opportunities, but why not? And he is very strong, and I think that is also the message of the potential that Africa is full of, okay? Now NBA Africa has settled down, so I work with them. We do a lot of things, because if you look at the American players, they come from Africa. Now you even look at the World Cup final from this photo where we see everything. Yes, there is a real African potential that is being demonstrated in several ways, and we must give this opportunity to believe, to dream. This is what is missing, because indeed there is a tendency to resignation when we live where we were born in difficult conditions, but everything is a Joel Embiid gives so much hope to the continent. What is it possible?
Basketball, sport, a source of hope for an entire continent, even a large and fair target. Thank you Mamadou Kwidjim.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being our great guest of the RFI Jeune Afrique economy, to be found on video on the RFI and Jeune Afrique YouTube channels. Thank you Julien Clémençot.
Thank you, Bruno.
This interview, the best passages to read in the columns of your newspaper. Thanks to Guillaume Munir, our director. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week. Have a nice day, have a nice evening, be well.